Hi everyone, I'm Marco Ferrari from Italy, and I will be joining IFEA-ANAMED as a postdoctoral fellow for the whole academic year 2025-2026. I am very pleased to have been awarded the joint fellowship provided by IFEA-ANAMED itself and the IFEA, the French Institute of Anatolian Studies in Istanbul. I have completed my PhD thesis in ancient history in a joint program between the University of Rome, Sapienza, and the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, and I have defended my thesis quite recently, actually, in January 2025. I have been trained as a classicist, so in ancient Greek and Latin, but over time my interests have shifted towards the contacts between the Greek communities of the Western Anatolian coast and the local Anatolian cultures, and more broadly with the ancient Near East. For my PhD thesis, I focused on a very specific phase of these contacts, that is the Achaemenid phase, roughly between the 6th century before Christ and the 4th century before Christ. Now, Anatolia is a very complex environment with many cultures and many peoples, and each people had their own language, their own historical and political background. But during the Achaemenid domination for the first time in history, all these peoples were brought together into one single empire. These peoples were grouped and divided into administrative unities, that is, the satrapies. Each satrapy had its own administrative system and its own hierarchy of officials. Now, these officials could be of Iranian origin, so coming directly from Persia, or they could be of local origin, so of Anatolian origin. And it is exactly through the formation and the development of a mixed Irano-Anatolian elite that I've consecrated the first part of my thesis. Of course, these elites tried to imitate the prestige model provided by the Iranian aristocracies. For instance, they adopted Iranian names, they dressed like the Persians, they even invented false genealogies to add Persian names in the histories of the families. And still, they tried also to integrate very important cultural elements of the local cultural heritage. So, for example, they used local alphabets and local languages, or they employed prestige titles or even royal titles rooted in the local history. So the Achaemenid phase in Anatolia is the history of the formation of what I've called an inter-ethnic ruling class. That is an elite whose members shared specific cultural traits, blending Iranian elements and Anatolian elements and Greek elements, regardless of their ethnic origin. For the second part of my thesis, I tried to identify a rather mysterious people of Anatolia, that is the Scudrians. Now, Scudra is at the same time an administrative and an ethnic label that we can find in the Achaemenid royal inscriptions, but that we do not find in Greek sources. Traditionally, the Scudrians have been identified with the European Thracians, but I've tried to argue for a broader delimitation of the Scudrians. I think that the Scudrians comprehended not only the European Thracians, but also all the other peoples in the northwestern part of Anatolia that, according to the Greeks, were somehow related to the Thracians. And I'm speaking of the Asian Thracians, the Bithynians, the Mysians, and most of all, the Phrygians. So this case study is also the inspiration of the project, of the research project that I have proposed for the IFEA-ANAMED Joint Fellowship. The title is Integration and Assimilation of the Irano-Anatolian Elites in the Achaemenid Satrapy of Scudra. And my intention is to draw, let's say, a cultural history of the elites ruling Scudra. We know that Scudra have been ruled continuously by at least two Iranian families, the Megabatidae and, after them, the Pharnacids. Now, they are Iranian families, so dynasties coming directly from Persia, and yet they were very much integrated in the Scudrian local environment. For example, they used the local alphabet and the local language, and then speaking in the specific case of the Phrygian alphabet and of the Phrygian language. And they also chose, as the main seat of the Scudrian satrap, the city of Dasculion. It is on the southern banks of the Kuşgulu, not very far from the city of Bursa nowadays. Dasculion was not a Persian foundation. It is exactly the opposite. Dasculion was a very important city already during the Phrygian kingdom, between the 8th and the 7th century before Christ. And we know, thanks to the Greek sources, that there were many legends about the founder of the city, Dasculos, who was somehow related to the main dynasties ruling in Anatolia before the Achaemenids. So the choice of Dasculion as the main seat of the satrap in Scudra was a choice of continuity. I think so that the Scudrian elite is a very good example of that mixed Irano-Anatolian elite I was referring to at the beginning. And to write a cultural history of this elite, we have many sources that we have to deal with. The Greek sources, of course, the epigraphic sources, both in Greek and in local languages. We have the numismatic evidence, and we have, of course, the archaeological data. My principal aim for this research project is to collect first-hand archaeological data by detailed surveys of the key archaeological sites in the area of Scudra. It is Dasculion, of course. The city of Gordion also was very important during the Phrygian kingdom, and Dasculion and Gordion, they both had their own archives, so they're very important also from an administrative perspective, let's say. Another very important point for my research is the interregional perspective. So I think that the Scudrian elites have to be put into context and to be better understood in comparison with the other elites in Anatolia. And I think it is the only way to better understand the similarities and the differences between the Scudrian elites and the other elites in Anatolia. So they are the key words of my research project that I want to carry out in Istanbul. And I think that that's all for now. I'm very much looking forward to being in Istanbul very soon.